Welcome to Mindset, Mood and Movement, a systemic approach to human behavior, performance and well-being. Our psychological, emotional and physical health are all connected. And my guests and I endeavor to share knowledge, strategies and tools for you to enrich your life and work. Today, we are looking at how to regulate your emotions and find meaning in life and work. I'm joined by my guest, Adam Morgan, who's a clinical psychologist, who I'm very excited to speak to because he works in these fields similar to me, but different. So we're going to dive in about these two topics. And we want to cover both of them for the very premise that emotions and meaning do go hand in hand. You need to understand how you feel about something, which is what it means, which is why we've got the topics coming together. So without further ado, Adam, welcome.
Hi.
Good to have you on. I'm curious, Adam, perhaps you could share with us when you started to pay more attention to how your emotions are and how you regulate them, and perhaps the quest of meaning. Perhaps take us on a little bit of a journey to where that all began.
Yeah, well, we were talking before, weren't we? And I'm going to have to go back quite a way, I'm afraid. So for me, as a teenager, I guess I didn't know what to do with my life at all. I hadn't got a clue. And everyone's telling you, go off to university. And for me, they were saying, go and study engineering. And I was thinking, well, I don't want to be an engineer. Anyway, and so I was very uncertain about, I suppose the meaning of my life and thinking, well, what is it? And then, so that was kind of my frame of mind. And then I had a kind of a pretty formative experience in a weird setting. I was one day just sat on a tube train. I lived in like northwest London. I was on I think it was the Bakerloo line into Paddington. I was sat on this train, minding my own business, but with all of this kind of stuff on my mind. And out of nowhere, I had this kind of experience where I lost all desire. So I felt completely satisfied. Like I could have sat on that tube train for all eternity and I'd have been completely satisfied. And it kind of became a bit timeless in that moment as well. Time kind of didn't really sort of vanished a little bit. And I also had this sense I lost all, well, fear is a strong word, but all anxiety, all concern, all worry. So I felt completely safe. And it was, I felt like I'd woken up from a dream in a way. I felt like I was awake and alive, like when you're a little kid and everything sparkles a bit. And it kind of gave me this sense that, actually there is, for me, that became the meaning of life. So this, this sense that you could have this transformative experience of the world, that you could feel completely beyond the normal concerns or the normal things that are running around inside your head. And then I remember coming across that very famous bit of that Blake poem where he says something like, what does he say? To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And when I read that, I thought, that was the best description that I felt I had of that experience I had on the train, particularly the eternity in an hour, because it felt like I was sitting in all eternity and yet it was happening in clock time, in clock time. So I suppose that was the first real point at which I started to feel a sense of meaning in life anyway, for me, like a real sense of, oh wow, this life can be this, transformative or this rewarding.
That's really such a profound experience from what you were saying on the tube that it sounds transcendental in many ways. And
it was.
It sounds really cool, like a lot of time that we all could do with that. It makes me think of the Greek description of time. There's chronos, which is sort of time moving forwards, and kairos, which is more like vertical time, where time stands still. And of course, a lot of the masters from yoga and Buddhism and these sorts of wonderful areas have often spoken about being present and presence. And of course, a lot of certainly for me, a lot of my anxieties are future orientated. That's the whole premise of anxiety. If one can be deeply present, then inherently there is nothing to fear, is there? Which is, I guess, a wonderful experience for you to dial into. I'm curious to how that experience has then kind of been a platform or a sort of a start point for you to then move into certainly the world of clinical psychology, because that's a big field, isn't it? And of course, it's quite a technical field, clinical psychology, from my interpretation. But perhaps you could share how that sort of a transcendental understanding of what means something to you, and then how you took that forward.
Yeah, so I think, well, for me, it made me very aware of the importance of your internal state, your what was inside. And then, so there's there's a quote. I'm going to sound like I'm going to get all religious on you, but there's a quote, isn't there? What is it? The kingdom of heaven is within you, or so that's kind of idea. Yeah, it's inside. That kind of made me realize actually what the because so much of life we spend trying to organize the outside in order to organize the inside. So like, if I have the right external circumstances, my internal world will feel good. And I guess it was a pretty clear indication, because I was sat on the Bakerloo line. Now, it's nothing wrong with the Bakerloo line, but it's not lovely. So it was clearly my internal state that was the most significant thing in that moment. So I guess, yeah, it gave me that feeling. And I guess I just became curious, or possibly even obsessed with like internal states, and how do you get to feel like that? Because like you said, the past and the future and the present, that old idea, if we all think about it, we all only ever in the present moment. We never we've been in the past, but we're only ever in this moment. We can never go back, and we can never go forwards either. And yet, as you said, we spend so much of our lives, mentally anyway, living in those other places other than the one that we're in. Yeah, so I became very curious about that, but I had no thought of psychology when I was at school, I did maths, physics, chemistry A-levels, and so I had no thought of I knew nothing really about psychology as a form of study, and it wasn't in my mind at all. And so in terms of how I got into psychology, my story goes that I then met my wife, and we got married, had a kid, and then it was like, and back in this time I think I was dispatch riding, I was just earning a living however I could, but was starting to become aware that it would be good to have a proper way of earning money. And there's a friend suggested, why don't you work in the helping professions? And I looked around at different professions, and I liked the sound of psychology. I thought I felt like it was something I was intuitively interested in. So it was quite a pragmatic choice, actually. It wasn't, although it was connected to my interest in experience, the experience of being a human being, and what that was.
When I hear what you're saying there about that kind of being drawn into the helping profession, of course, that's the space that I've navigated into over the years, and not always. I've done many things. I did a podcast recently with someone. They asked me my life story, which it takes on a long convoluted way. I'm not going here on this one. But when we think about what we're really zoning in on today, like regulating emotions, finding meaning in a world of busyness, chaos, I see people who come to me. They don't come to me because it's all going well. They come to me because something isn't working. There's a stressor, there's a problem, there's discomfort, there's something like that. And it's absolutely curious, isn't it? A lot of our world is predicated on externalized stuff. Do well at work, set up a business, get a great job. Then you'll be doing something. Then your life will mean something. And it's such a curious thing. I studied some existential principles in applied to coaching. Now, existentialism can seem a bit of a dark psychology or philosophy, really, but it's got some good stuff to say around meaning, because inherently there's no meaning in anything, according to the existentialists. So we as humans apply meaning, we give meaning, whether that's to our job or to our relationship or to our success or whatever that thing is. And the meaning is in some ways generated. Now, of course, you and I probably both know that everything's influenced from the outside and the inside. You can't not come up with meaning that's not imbued by your family, friends, and culture. But it's an interesting thing when we take perhaps an existentialist lens and go, so if inherently the meaning that's created from my life, my activities, what I'm doing, is my own to generate, that gives us some interesting volition. And I'm really interested in how you've taken that, because you and I spoke previously about a lot of the Indian principles, yoga and similar things. And I'd love to get your thought on making meaning yourself from your perspective. Certainly is from clinical psychology, but perhaps from the sort of the more meditation Indian influences that you've had.
Yeah. So I suppose, I was interesting. I was thinking about meaning, I'm making dinner. I was chopping stuff up with a knife, and I was thinking about meaning and what we were going to talk about. And I was thinking, well, because being a human being is a complicated thing, and so it's already more complicated to think about meaning with humans. But I was chopping with this knife, and I was looking at the knife, thinking, well, what's the meaning of a knife? And I thought, well, it's kind of connected to what it does. It cuts things. So if you were trying to use a knife, I don't know, to write a book, it would be very unfulfilling and frustrating, and you wouldn't get very far. So I was sort of thinking, well, maybe meaning is connected to utility, or to what something's capable of. And I suppose for me, that was going back to that experience on the tube train, that gave me a sense of meaning. So it was like, well, this is what's possible as a human being. This is, and some of these things that you read, like the bit of the Blake poem and these other things, which sound all very unattainable, I'd had this little mini half an hour where they'd been real. And so it was like, oh, actually it is actually attainable. I don't know how, I don't know what that's about. So for me, yeah, the meaning is, to me, slightly connected to, like what's possible, what we're capable of, without going too crazy. I'm not a big fan of extremes, like, well, we should all climb to the top of Everest and that kind of thing, but in a more sort of a moderate way. So yeah, as you said, I eventually got into meditation after like 10 years of not being able to figure out this experience and where it came from and how to regenerate it. I started to meditate because that seemed to be a common thing that people said, this is something that helps. So I thought, well, I'm gonna try that. And that, I suppose, yeah, I don't know, has that given meaning? I guess it's given me a map to navigate being human and to understand what's going on and how to, because they've got this concept, haven't they, of like balance, so you've almost like, you've got your emotional self, you've got your rational self, and then you've got, if you like, a wise self. You've got a bit of you that is beyond that is transcendental, that goes beyond, like you said, your thoughts or your feelings, and so that is quite helpful to realize that you've got those different bits of you, or you've got those different ways of being, that they're different, basically, and so and trying to navigate, if you want to navigate to that bit of you which is a little bit more, beyond, transcendent, whatever the word is.
Yeah. I know my previous self or selves, and people I work with who are my sort of reference points, a lot of the time we can be in our head. Now, that's obviously a turn of phrase, but we're in our thoughts, we're in ideas, we're in the concept of I and my life and my problems, my challenges. And it's really difficult to separate thoughts from emotions. And of course, they can't really be separated. They are different phenomena, and yet they go together. And as you probably know, my work is curious around looking at how the mind and our states of mood and our states of movement all interweave, because I've never met a person that doesn't have a body of some kind that moves in some way, whether it's internal activity or external. And there's all mood that regulates how we think and feel. So it's all one interwoven system. But if we're sitting around thinking, I'm really struggling to feel good right now, the basic premise, perhaps somebody hasn't been on this journey so far, and struggling with stress, struggling with emotions, and difficulty to understand the feeling of being in themselves, in whatever type of life that is. How might you address that? If someone came and sat in front of you and say, Adam, look, I'm really struggling right now. I'm super stressed. I've got this up. I've got all these pressures. Knowing what you know, how would you then bridge the gap between perhaps some of these experiences you've had and your experience as a professional to, let's say, the layperson who doesn't have these experiences? And what would you say to them? What would you do?
Oh, I think, for me, as you said, meaning often, where we are any one point in life is often built up from a range of different stuff, but some of it is where we've been and what we've lived through. So there's a huge amount of evidence I've worked as a clinical psychologist in the NHS. I don't currently work in the NHS, but I worked in the NHS for 26 years, I think. And working in a mental health service, helping people with, I guess, more complicated, more tricky mental health. And there's a huge amount of evidence to show that there's a really clear link between mental health and addictions as problems and difficult experience and the idea of trauma, if you like. And there's a whole bunch of studies called the adverse childhood event studies, which I don't know you probably heard of, but I mean, they're really old. They've been around since the 80s or possibly even the late 70s. I can't remember. But it surprises me that we still haven't caught up with them. We still haven't really learnt the lesson of what they're saying. So for me, if people are struggling, I would want to know a little bit about their story, about how their life has been, to try and contextualize it, because often what will happen in life is we tend to self-attribute. So we blame ourselves for things that don't go well. And so if you can get a sense of what somebody has lived through and they can get a sense of it themselves, then that can give people other ways of understanding why they're struggling. So if someone's having a really hard time, they might be like, just think, oh God, what's wrong with me? I shouldn't be feeling like this. I shouldn't be stressed. There's no need for me to be like that. But actually, if you look at what someone's life has been like, you might find all sorts of reasons why they're finding life difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of like how to help, I think modern life has changed our habits, hasn't it, of what we do in a day on a really practical level. And we do nowadays, it's quite easy to do things that are kind of fun, but actually don't leave us feeling very good. So obviously smartphones and, well, back in my generation, TVs and being sedentary, I guess, not moving, like you talk about bodies, not really using our body at all. I mean, it's quite possible. I'm quite guilty of this, I have to confess. But yeah, it's quite possible to not use your body much in modern life. You get up, you get in a car. Well, I'm a psychologist. I sit in a chair, I talk to people, so not using, I think one of the things that, and there's loads of evidence around it, isn't there, around activity, showing that activity is really as effective, for example, at helping people with depression as antidepressant medication.
Yeah, there are some studies on it. Yeah, and it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I see things I use a lot of models in my work, so some of my own, some from other people. A model that I use, which sort of fits with what you're saying, but perhaps gives a different perspective, is to consider three states, which is three things, story, state, and structure. So I will say to a person, let's look at these three, and the structure is your body, and perhaps your home or your work environment, but the physical stuff. And we start with the body. Well, what's happening in your body? Some people are always amazed to know that when I call out if they're flexed, i.e. folded forward, well, that is actually the threat protection response. At its extreme, we'd be folded into a sort of a baby kind of curl up position. So anytime that you're flexed, which invariably using a smartphone or computer puts you in, your feedback signals from your body to your brain are there's a threat perception going on here. The body's in a slightly threatened state versus an open, upper spine's upright, shoulders are relaxed but open. And this is something quite easy to shift. State, of course, is emotions, and we'll speak a little more about this shortly, but what emotions? Can you name them? Where are they in your body? Can you breathe in a way that regulates your nervous system? And some people, when I say that, they look at me like I've just spoken in a very different language. So there's a really good in. But the story part is so curious, as you've alluded to. We are, I guess the meaning of I is all built on, well, what was my mum and dad like, if you had parents, or what was my upbringing? What's the culture that I live in? And all this stuff that we're swimming in.
Yeah, and what we're told, I mean, there are people all around us who constantly want to tell us who we are. But there are people who want to tell us who we are, or what we should be, or what we should want, or what it means if we own certain things or don't own certain things, or that. And they have a very clear motive, which is to make a profit. They're not really there promoting our well-being. They're there largely, because they're wanting to sell us an idea. So there's that. And then you say, then there's our families. They also are the same. They have their own ideas about themselves and the world, and therefore about. So how do you navigate all of that? I mean, in India, they call it, the Bhavasagara, the ocean of illusion. How do you find your way through that confusing soup of ideas to what you feel like? What do I feel about myself and what my life is about? And that's quite hard to get to. It's quite a like you said, a long path to get to the point where you even think about that, where you even start to wonder about it. So yeah, I think that for me, yeah, helping, generally in my professional life, it's been about helping people with really complicated lives. And when I say complicated, I often mean traumatic, really complicated, difficult lives, to try and, yeah, take stock of what they've had to deal with and how maybe that's impacted them, and develop a more compassionate understanding of why they find themselves where they do. And then, but then you, like you say, then there's all the, there are things that we know you can do to be more, feel better, like being more active. But also we know that telling people to be more active is not an effective intervention for making people more active. So there's all the research around, actually, if you are very directive in your approach to helping people, then generally what happens is they don't feel better, or they don't respond to that. So for example, the current advice that all GPs get, or the training that we used to get it, I don't know why they gave it to us as psychologists, but anyway, the smoking cessation training currently, the last one I did in the NHS, basically boils down to just saying to people, look, if you ever do want to give up, let us know, we can help you. So no telling them what to do, or, none of that, just saying, if you want help, we can help. Because actually that's the most effective thing you can do, because the driver has to come from within. You can't instill that in someone. And if you try, often it doesn't go well. It's kind of has to go inside out. I was reading, I sent a link of it to my colleague that I work with. I read an article on my phone. It was about someone who worked as a negotiator in hostage situations. And it's quite interesting, because basically the bit I read of it is he was saying the whole job is about emotion regulation. He said the whole thing is you've got to control yourself, and then you can go on. He said, because the moment you lose your calm sort of, there's this idea in psychology of a window of tolerance, this idea that we have this, these extremes on either side, but in the middle we have this kind of state of being where we're relaxed but we're alert. So we're not stressed but we're not asleep, but we're alert and we're calm, we're confident. And what he's saying is you've got to get in that window of tolerance. And if you don't do that, it's you're nowhere. So he was saying it's an inside out job. So you have to deal with the inside, you're inside. And then actually he was saying the biggest issue in negotiating isn't actually the kidnappers. It's everyone else. It's the families of the victim. It's keeping everyone calm and keeping them looking after themselves so that they don't get stressed out. That's the biggest challenge, which, yeah, so it is something about, has to come from within, doesn't it? It has to, and as a helping person in someone's life, that's a really interesting challenge. How do I help someone in, without becoming another person, just telling them who they should be or what they should do? So there's a risk that as a psychologist, I just become another person telling someone, this is how you should think about yourself. This is how, and I might think my version is better for them, but it's still my version. So I find that a really fascinating thing. How do you hold a conversation with someone that allows them to, think for themselves about who they are, rather than just being another person telling them, oh, you should be this kind of person. You should be more relaxed. You should be more active. You should, that kind of thing.
Yeah, shoulding all over the place.
Yeah, without even saying it.
Of
you
course.
don't have to say should. You can imply it, can't you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. The coaching kind of philosophy, I suppose you say, the overarching theme is always we should hold the belief that the client has all the resources and all the utilities to heal, to grow, to change. Now, I challenge that, because sometimes you need to give people more skills. You give people more skills and better choices, they normally use those skills and make better choices. So sometimes we need to provide the right tools. But you're absolutely right. I think that energy of choice of change, it has to come from within. And I think this comes back to what we're trying to frame here. It's like, how do you regulate your emotions? Well, first you realize that things will happen around you, stressors, problems, things that trigger you, that will always happen. But the emotions are happening within. And I find this is interesting, because when we understand, well, they're my emotions, these are my biochemicals in my unique system, I do have some volition, I do have some choice here. And I think that's a really interesting one. As we've probably spoken about, I use breathwork as a fundamental skill. I teach the basic stuff because the basic works, which is, if you understand the diaphragm, which is the lower belly region, If that is the main prime mover in the breath, and you're breathing through your nose, you're breathing out slower than you breathe in, the signals that come up from the physical, so from the body, through the nervous system to the brain, are by default coming into intersecting into the what's called the autonomic nervous system. And regulating emotions for me starts at the body. It never not involves the thinking part, but it always starts with the body. It's one of the best ways to go in and regulate, to do that. I'm so curious because you've got a wonderful piece of work on your website, which of course we will link in the show notes, but you've got a whole thing called the brain gym, which I like, because I spend a lot of time in the gym because gyms are cool, in my view. Perhaps you could share a little bit around some of your work and the tools that you use, how that might be useful in regulating emotions.
Sure. So Brain Gym is something that, but largely I have to give credit to a colleague of mine called Stolobig who wrote it, and then I helped him write it and edit it, and so it's basically this idea that, obviously, as you said, you can go to the gym and train your body, and the idea that, well, actually we can, as you said, we can also think about practicing training our internal world, or putting time into looking after that. And yeah, it's based on, Stoller is very interested in all the neurological stuff. So it's based on some really simple models of how our brains are structured and function. So the idea that there's one common, the brain's so complicated and we do not understand it. And probably this is all going to change, but there is a general consensus that there seem to be three structures in our brain. And in the brain, we talk about the idea of the brain stem, which is like the basic functions of staying alive, heart and temperature and breathing, and that's fully formed at the moment we're born. And then we have this limbic system, which is kind of connected to our sensory experience of the world, is all out there in the world, and that's, if you like, the seat of our emotion and our reactions to the world. And then this cortex and the prefrontal cortex, the most, or some people say the most sophisticated, I don't know if that's true or not, but bit of our brain, it's the bit of us that as human beings we can kind of reflect on things. We can step back and go, oh, I wonder if I should be feeling upset, or wonder maybe, the bit we talked about, like that almost self-aware kind of bit where we turn around and detach a little bit from ourselves and reflect on it. And a lot of emotion regulation is about basically keeping all of those bits of our brain, well, particularly the last bit, keeping it online, if you like. So when we become anxious and we become stressed, if we have a trauma, our body goes into fight, flight, or freeze, or if it doesn't even get that far, it starts releasing cortisol and other stress hormones. And they actually kind of shut down a little bit the cortex, because we don't really need it in an emergency, because we don't want to be reflecting, we need to be surviving. So a lot of emotion, so the Brain Gym is about explaining how this all works to people and ideas around window of tolerance, and then talking about, well, how do you then manage what's going on inside of you if your inside world has been rattled by your outside life. So if the outside has gotten into you, if the things you've lived with have been so difficult that they've got inside your head and in your neurology, it kind of gets in your neurology. So yeah, and it's very much what you just said. So the first bit of we've thought about in terms of regulating emotion is, as you said, physiological stuff. So the first bit is we need to try and trigger this parasympathetic response that you were talking about. So we have our sympathetic nervous system, which is all about being stressed, I suppose, about ready for action. So we know with butterflies in the stomach, racing heart, sweaty palms, and that doesn't have, we don't need a tiger to do that. So even like recording today, that'll do that. My hands are more sweaty than they would otherwise be. So anything quite minor, you could say, this isn't a threatening situation, what we're doing, but it doesn't matter, because in the back of our head, our neurology kind of goes, oh, and it gets us ready. So that's the sympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic is the opposite, is the relaxation response. So the heart rate reducing, the blood pressure going down, breathing slowing, which is why, as you said, breathing's such a great thing to focus on, because we can control it. We can't, some people say they can, but I don't think most people can consciously control their heart rate, but they can quite easily consciously control their breathing rate. So that's quite a nice available way into trying to mimic this parasympathetic response. So we talk about that in the beginning, like how can you relax? How can you calm down? And then we've got a section all about, well, I suppose about meaning, actually, which is about how can we look at things differently? So can we look at things that are going on in our lives in ways that leave us feeling less upset? It's not about deluding yourself at all, because that's not helpful remotely, but it's just about trying to, can we, see things in a way that the meaning of which is more compassionate to ourselves. So rather than, thinking if something goes wrong, rather than thinking, oh, I'm an idiot, or I'm such a, I'm useless, which is, it's really common, I think it's really not unusual for all of us to be quite hard on ourselves when things don't go well. So rather than doing that, can we offer a different kind of thought? Can we kind of think, one thing I don't know, but one thing I always do in my head is I kind of have this philosophy, which is I'm always doing my best. Sometimes my best is not good enough. I'm very aware. Sometimes my best is a bit rubbish. But it is, in that moment, it was all I was capable of. And I kind of have to have the humility to accept that's all I was capable of in that moment. And it wasn't very good. But I find that is more manageable to live with than feeling like I should have done better. If only I'd have done whatever, it would have been better. Because that leads to feeling regretful. And as we've just said, the past is gone. You're not going back and changing it. That's, we don't know how to do that yet. And so that's not happening. So it's how do you let the past rest? How do you let it be, how do you let it be in the past rather than it live still in the present? So stop feeding it, basically.
Yeah, it's a really nice term, stop feeding it, because like with anything that you give, like a fire, if you feed it fuel, it will burn. Wherever you put your attention, your focus will go there. And it's easy to, well, I guess not easy. I think it's more simple to realize that it's your attention. You can choose where it goes. It's not always easy to move it, but it's simple. It's like, that's my attention. So I'm going to move it away from, let's say, unhelpful thinking, discompassionate voices. Hands up, I'm exactly one of those. I've done a lot of work on this, but I can still, I would never be as brutal to another person as I am on myself sometimes. So, and we do, but I love what you said there about realizing that was the best you can do, and perhaps it wasn't good enough. And I think there's something interesting about, and that's okay. Like, we're human, even those who've done loads of psychology and all the stuff. It's like, yeah, we're still as infallible and open to making mistakes and having good days and bad days as anybody. I wanted to just bring something and get your thoughts on it. This sort of self-identification I see is often a very problematic thing. Like, you do something, it doesn't work out, let's say, and you feel really bad about yourself. Like, oh, I've messed that up. I'm useless. I didn't do well at work, or I really screwed up that job, or whatever the whole thing is. Then it becomes so I-orientated. So the identity of I, it feels so personal. And we've made it all about ourselves, when actually, I think the brain/mind is onto a sort of a weird pattern here, because how do we know all of these things would have gone right or wrong? There's so many factors in life. So when we overly identify with I made the mistake and I am no good, I think there's an opportunity to kind of slightly separate one's identity from the action and realize, that's something different there. What's your take on that, with both your psychologist hat on and also your understanding from meditation?
Yeah, no, I definitely. I think that's, one of the things in meditation is exactly that little bit of separation, that trying not to react to the external and the internal world, but just trying to observe it, or to be a little bit detached from it. Not in a unhealthy way, because detachment can be unhealthy, but in a kind of a, so not pushing it away, but just standing back and noticing, a bit like, you would watch, I don't know, anything. You might watch a game of football, although that's probably not a very detached activity, but yeah, potentially. So I think, that's definitely one thing that can be really helpful. So, and it's that, going back to that brain model, it's more of that cortex, whereas, if we get this idea of like limbic hijack, where our emotions take over and we lose the ability to think and to stand back, then we're just driven by our emotion, which isn't always bad. It's not like emotions aren't bad, but under the wrong circumstances, it can cause trouble. There's that book, I forget his name, it was just embarrassing, but is he called Stephen Peters? There's the psychologist that wrote the Chimp Paradox.
Yeah, it's Dr. Steve Peters, isn't it? Yeah.
This is, yeah. So he talks about that, doesn't he? Saying, we've all got a chimp inside of us, like an emotional being that is just not really rational. And that's fine, but we need to look after it. We need to, he calls it chimp management, doesn't he? We need to manage it, because if we don't, or if we try and manage it with harshness, like if you had a real chimp, if you try to manage it by beating it or by being cruel to it, it's not going to go well. And it's the same for us. Like if we've got that bit of us, we need to be nice to it. We need to say, no, it's all right. Don't, it'll be fine. We'll come back to this, and we're not going to deal with it right now. So that's one strategy, isn't it? There's that, that old saying, sleep on it. So that's one strategy, which is with strong emotion. If we can find a way of literally waiting, often what will happen is our arousal level will reduce, and then we'll start to be able to manage it better. Once we're very highly emotional, it's really quite hard to be rational, and actually it's not the time to try too hard. Normally when that's happening, it's like all you need to really try and do is just see, can I not act? Can I somehow wait? Can I find a way of putting time between me and the event? And
That's
that
really
will allow me, to gain perspective.
I wanted to jump in there and say about dispelling the charge, because in, I think, polyvagal theory, let me reset that. So from polyvagal theory, there's one description, as other theories. Peter Levine's work on this as well, around the nervous system. But there's a charge in the nervous system. It's like mobilized. It's a stress response. You want to move towards something, or you want to move away from something. But it's there. You can't make it go away. But if you feel you can't for some reason, you're frozen, well, that's sort of blending into the state of trauma, helplessness, powerlessness. One thing I find really interesting, if certainly myself and some people I work with, if there's a high charge, whether it's a move toward or away, mostly it's move away for most people, but there can be, then allow that to express. And I'll give an example. I had a stressful situation a while back. I won't tell details, it's very long, convoluted, but I felt really, really triggered. I was so stressed. And I'm good at dealing with stress. I've got all the skills and all the tools, and it wasn't working. And then I had this sort of insightful moment thinking, it's a flight response. I feel I physically have to get out of here. And I was stuck in a room trying to think my way through the problem. So I went for a run. I physically went for a run, which exercised the psoas muscle, the physical body. I went for a run. It wasn't too far, a few miles or so. Came back. I could breathe. As you rightly said, my amygdala hijack is often termed. That had kind of settled. And I could think about the challenge I had to deal with. And then I could approach it with some different steps that were actually helpful. So this dispelling the charge, I found is very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also what you said also touched on another thing I think is really important, which is this. I heard this phrase when I was training, and I still hold it in mind, which is you have to be safe in order to feel safe. So sometimes you do have to, your priority is actually the external world, not your internal world. So if you are, I don't know, living in an abusive relationship, you don't want to practice emotional regulation. Well, you can, but it's really not, your primary focus needs to be, actually, I've got to make my world okay. I can't expect my internal world to be fine when my external world is dangerous, for example. So I think that's why I said before, being human is complicated. So I think, I always say to people, if you're sat in the middle of a road and a bus is coming, that's not the time to practice your breathing. The reason you're feeling anxious is because you're about to get hit by a bus. So you need to get out the road. When you're out the road, if you're, then later that day, you're sat at home having a cup of tea and you're safe and you're feeling anxious, okay, that's the moment where you can practice your internal, regulation. But it's kind of like, initially it's like, find the bus. Is there a bus coming? And if there is, we need to deal with it. But if there really isn't, okay, then it becomes about, okay, so I need to then help myself feel safe because I am safe.
Yeah.
But
that's such a great way. Anxiety, I mean, it seems to be ever present and ever growing in our world today. And it's curious, isn't it? I'm not a fan of pathologizing this. There are, I know, some kind of biological things and shifts for some people. But in general, I think the misunderstanding around anxiety is that it's a reaction. It's a reaction to stimulus or things that's happening, whether that's thought-based stuff in our own head and with worrying about what people are going to think about us, whether we messed up, whatever that be, or whether it's, there's a car coming, I need to jump out the road. But it's actually very elegant as a system. It's designed to keep you safe. So we don't want to start medicating it and getting rid of it and not realizing that it has every place in the world. I think the interesting part is understanding. I use the analogy of a smoke alarm because everyone's got one. It's like having a smoke alarm in the kitchen. You put the toast on, it slightly burns and the whole thing goes off. You need to change the sensitivity on the smoke alarm, but you don't want to turn it off because it's there to alert you fire. So in some ways, this is what we're talking about, isn't it? And regulating these emotions, but without shutting them down, without denying them. And I think it's about, for me, it's about having a relationship with the emotions, a better understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And as you said, getting to know yourself. I think it's, there's a risk, because we do nowadays, you talk a lot more about trauma and trauma is really important. And, a lot of the significant health problems that people face around addictions and mental health and complex lives, it is absolutely most often related to trauma for people. But there's always a risk in there, I think, that we then get this idea that all stress is bad for us and anything that sparks off our anxiety, as you said, is bad for us. And that's just not true. I mean, stress, like manageable stress, is actually good for us. If you take stress away from someone, it disables them. People overcoming manageable obstacles in life makes us feel competent. Learning to do something we couldn't previously do makes us feel good about ourselves. It's not the case that we should become like phobic of anxiety, like, oh, anxiety is bad, I have to get rid of it. Not at all. It's a normal part of life. We all get anxious doing, as I said, everyday things like podcasts like this or whatever it is that we're doing, or having to do something at work or talk to someone about something difficult. That's not bad for us. That's actually the stuff that can help us feel competent and capable as human beings. It's when it's toxic, it's when it's unmanageable. I said, if you're living in a violent relationship or you being subjugated or harmed in some way, when there's a misbalance in power and you're on the wrong end of it, and it's chronic and you can't get away, which obviously that often applies to children because children are inherently vulnerable and in need of care. But obviously those things, we know it's not surprising. You don't need a psychologist to tell you that. It's pretty obvious. That stuff's not good for us. But I think it's really important not to mix them up and then start thinking, anything that makes me stressed is bad for me. That's really not the case at all.
Yeah. So for me, when I think about what we're really trying to express here is regulating emotions doesn't mean getting rid of them. I think it means, so for some ways, for me, it's about getting closer to them and examining them and understanding them. A bit like you might get closer to a painting on the wall that you can see from far away and you see its colours and its textures and its nuances, and some bits are nice, some bits are soft, some bits are edgy and hard. And I think it's understanding this nuance better and then using tools like meditation, breath work, free framing to help. I want to cycle this to meaning now. So we spoke a lot about emotions, but of course we'll start adding meaning because meaning makes stuff good, right? When you do like a job that you love, or I don't know, you spend time. And of course, we have feelings that tell us that it's a lovely thing or an exciting thing. That's our feedback system telling us. It's not just a thought, it's a feeling. So when we talk about meaning, I'd like to get your wisdom on, well, how can one apply and get some more meaning, whether it's life or work? But what's your take on this about how to get that richer meaning in life and work?
I was thinking about it. It's a difficult question. I don't know why I've given myself a difficult question, but I think when I was reflecting on it, I think partly meaning does come back to fulfilling those things that you feel you're capable of. Like I said, the analogy of the knife. If you use a knife to try and, I don't know, undo a bolt on your car engine, it's not helpful and it's not fulfilling. So I think for me, there's something about meaning which is connected to feeling that we are doing things that we are competent at, or that we can become competent at, and that obviously that we enjoy. I mean, you're talking about going back to the brain gym, the last bit of the brain gym, so you got the kind of calm yourself down and then the reassess things, refocus, relook at things. The last bit is focusing on your strengths. What are you good at? What do you like as a person? What brings you joy? What things do you find satisfying, and what things are you good at? People are always good at something. I always find that's a really interesting question to talk to people about when I'm working with them. Say, what are you good at? And it's amazing, and I include myself in this. Often it's amazing how we don't really think about that very often. Maybe it's not the done thing, no one wants to blow their own trumpet or that kind of thing. But you ask someone, what are you good at? And often that's a really hard question to answer. But I think that's a part of it for me. It's a part of whatever is meaningful in my life. Is like, what do I enjoy in life, and what am I good at?
Lovely. Yeah, really, really nice. It's so interesting that because when I think about my own journey through certainly my professional career of really being guided by other people's meaning, which you said at the top of our session, and not really tapping into my meaning, that sweet young kid that I was growing up and trying to be authentic, it got kind of sucked into capitalism, making money, you being in the right cool jobs. And now I'm very privileged in a way, and I recognize I do have privilege that I can choose a lot of my own choices, and that it's come through hard work, and there are things I don't have, but this for me gives me meaning. When I work with the human condition, when I help another person make a change in their life, my goodness, does that make me feel good. And that's a lovely, lovely, energizing thing. Now, not all of us can have that in every sphere of our life. Not always, it doesn't come work. But I would say that for me, life is so damn important. It's the most precious gift you're ever going to get. You only get one of them, in my perspective. So if you can find meaning, and if you can't do it in your work, then maybe in your personal life, whether that's hobbies, plays, children, all those different things. But I think you're really onto something here about, what are you good at? What brings you that lovely, joyful emotion?
And also, I think in there, you mentioned like helping people. I think connectedness is a big part of it. I think, what we know, isn't it, is if we make someone disconnected, if we isolate, look at COVID, the government got, whatever you think about the government and all of that stuff, they got very worried about locking people in their houses, because what they knew was if they locked 1,000 people in and then 3 months later said you can come out, 1,000 people are not coming out. 624 will come out, and the rest will go, no, I'm good, thanks. Because isolation generally doesn't go well for us. We tend to get low in mood, we get demotivated, we feel not good about ourselves, and we want to hide away. And there has been a real spike in referrals to mental health services as a result of COVID. I saw that when I worked through COVID in the NHS, and we had a big increase in people being referred. So connectedness is another big part of it. People that we care about, people that we generally, on average, we enjoy other people's company. If they're not difficult, toxic people, that are trying to cause us misery. So I think that, and not just connectedness with people, connectedness with, I'm going to sound a bit, I grew up in London, and I never really I was a bit of a city boy, and I guess I never really, when people talk about loving the countryside, but I've learned from living down in Devon that actually nature is a hugely giving thing. That if you spend time, there's loads of evidence nowadays. There's loads of evidence about gardening, for example, showing that the benefits it has for mental health, that something about the natural world, our nervous system likes it. If you put someone in a forest or in a field, they generally feel better than if you stick them in a factory or an artificial environment. And even simple things like the colour green sparks the parasympathetic response. So it slows our heart rate. And, apparently that's why they used to paint hospitals green. I don't know if that's true or not, but I heard that. So, so there's connectedness to people, connectedness to the natural world. And I think that is why modern life is such a challenge, because we had our industrial revolution, didn't we? And we became more industrialized. And yes, we had the industrial revolution, we became more industrialized. And then we've become, potentially, we are at risk of being less involved in the natural world than we would have otherwise been. And we have to make an effort to do it, rather than it just being a bit like exercise. As I said, there are things called gyms now. We didn't need gyms because we've probably spent all day having to do such physical stuff. But so that those things, I think, they give us a sense of fulfillment and meaning as well, very much so.
Yeah, lovely, really lovely. And to flip that one, so a lot of the problems I see simplified are disconnection from someone's thoughts and their feelings, from their head, from their body, from themselves and their partners and their community or their business friends. And the answer is reconnection. And it's so interesting. and again, it sounds simple, doesn't it? And in many ways, some of the great things are like, the great masters of the East, some of them I follow, and, some of this stuff is simple. It's simple and easy are different. And it's always important to distinguish that. But it's simple. It's like go connect with nature. But it does take a certain charge, a certain energy and effort to, I live in a city myself, and there's a lot of concrete around here. It's not that pleasant. Some of it's lovely. It's by the sea. It's lovely. But the small bit I'm in is I see too much concrete and not enough green. And it isn't ideal. So it means I've got to travel out to the downs to get some nice green stuff. And I feel great then. But when we think about meaning, we're also thinking about feeling. And when we think about feeling, we're thinking about meaning. So as a summary, we want to actually hold those experiences of being a human being, whether it's in personal life or in professional life, and realize that emotions and meaning, they work together. And it's really important that you tend to them. Like if you're interested in your food, you get the right macros in, right micronutrients. It's very, very important too.
And like you said about the smoke alarm, I guess if we're feeling rubbish, I guess it's a little bit of depends. If it's like chronically, then maybe it's, like you said, a little bit of an alarm saying we need to have a look at what's in our environment, our internal and our external environment. Have a look and go, okay, something around here is causing trouble.
Yeah.
And try and think what that might be. It could be like our internal world, that we have things going on, or it could be our external world.
Lovely. Really nice. So to summarize, how to regulate your emotions and find meaning, well, it's work, and it's worthy work. In my experience, it sounds like from your experience too, and I don't know about anyone else, but I live with myself 360, 24/7. I'm always with me. So it's definitely worth the energy of how you're feeling about life, how you're feeling about yourself, and the actions and the things that you do, and finding meaning. So hopefully, dear listener, there's plenty you can take away from that. One of the things I was really interested in was the kind of hearing different perspectives, but similar to mine, about how we have a better relationship with emotions, and use some of the strategies and tools that we've got. We'll put links into the show notes for Brain Gym and so forth. But know that emotions are not bad. They are emotions. Regulating emotions, as it says, it's like perhaps steadying the ship when it needs to, but allowing it to flow in the water when the storms are there. And it's being with. And that's I know from what Adam, you've said, and my experience, a lot of the Indian influences that I've had is about being with. And that's a nice way to be, being with your thoughts, being with quiet, being with discomfort. And there's meaning in something that lifts you up, as you said, connectedness, all these wonderful things. So Adam, last final thoughts, perhaps for our listeners who might take some final sort of snapshots and sound bites from your perspective, please.
I guess I'm going to have to go back to the one we were just talking about, which is, remember to do things you love, do things that you enjoy. And if you notice you've forgotten to do some of those things, then it's always worth seeing if you can do them. Yeah, that would be one. What would the other one be? Another one, I suppose there's something, isn't there, about healthy detachment. So standing back from. So you were talking there about, managing difficult moments. One thing I've heard a lot of clients say they find really helpful in a really difficult moment, and I can relate to this as well, is some thought around this won't last forever. This is temporary. This will pass, kind of thing. I think that one of the things that's really difficult is when we get into a frame of mind where we think that this is never going to get better. And which is, well, I would say it's never true, because never's just too long. Do you know what I mean? It's just too long. Nothing that we know about, in the tangible world, they're just to last forever. So I think, a healthy sense of impermanence.
Yeah, lovely, really nice. And yeah, when you're in a really difficult place, it's so vital to just hang on. Like, yep, this will change, this will pass. That's a lovely sentiment to close on. Adam, thank you for your time, your thoughts. I know you have vast amounts to share, but so much you've shared already, which is wonderful. We will put details in the show notes for Brain Gym, which I believe anyone can download. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's free. We have a website. There's other things on there. People are free to steal it all and use it to their heart's content. And
I prefer recycle.
Okay, recycle. We're a social enterprise, so we're not for profit. So we enjoy developing resources and then making them available.
Amazing. Cool. The links will go in the show notes. So do check out Adam's site. Look at the resources. There's lots of good stuff. I've already been through them, but there's some great stuff. So do have a look. If you want to reach out to Adam, again, contact details will be in the show notes. And if you want to reach out to myself, same too. But I want to thank you, Adam. I want to thank dear listener for joining us on this journey. Hopefully there's some things that have triggered you that are going to make a change in your life. If they do let us know. Thanks so much, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe. And if a friend would benefit from hearing this, do send it on to them as well. If you would like to get in touch yourself, then you can go to my website, which is saljeffreys.com, spelled SALJEFFERIES, saljeffreys.com. Hit the Get in Touch link, and there you can send me a direct message. If you'd like to go one step further and learn whether coaching can help you overcome a challenge or a block in your life, then do reach out, and I offer a call where we can discuss how this may be able to help you. Until the next time, take care.